I thought the hardest part about turning 70 would be accepting my own mortality. But it turns out the real challenge was discovering that the people I trusted most had already planned my funeral and were counting down the days until they could collect. What they didn't know was that I had been planning something too, and my version of the story had a very different ending. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Elena Whitmore, and for the past 15 years I believed I was living the dream retirement my late husband David and I had always planned. Our beautiful colonial home in Maplewood sat on 3 acres of prime real estate, complete with the rose garden I'd tended since 1987 and the old oak tree where David had proposed 42 years ago. After his passing 5 years ago, I thought the loneliness would consume me, but thankfully, I wasn't alone. My daughter Jessica and her husband Mark had moved in to help me manage the property, and their twin boys, Tyler and Mason, filled the house with laughter again. At least, that's what I told myself every morning when I woke up in what used to be the guest room. The master bedroom, you see, was too much for an old woman like me to handle. Jessica had gently explained this when they first moved in, her voice soft and patient like she was talking to a confused child. The stairs to the second floor were dangerous for someone my age, she said. What if I fell in the middle of the night? What if I had a medical emergency and couldn't call for help? It made perfect sense, really. The guest room on the first floor was smaller, yes, and it faced the neighbor's garage instead of my beloved rose garden. But it was practical, safe, responsible. I should have been grateful. Jessica reminded me of this often. "Mom, you know we're only looking out for you," she would say whenever I hesitated about some new arrangement they'd made. When they converted David's study into a playroom for the boys, scattering toy trucks across the mahogany desk where he'd written his memoirs. When they replaced my grandmother's china cabinet with a massive entertainment center. When they hired someone to help me with my finances, because keeping track of investments was too stressful for someone my age. I was grateful, or at least I tried to be. These were my children, after all. Well, Jessica was my child. Mark had become family when he married her 12 years ago, and the boys. The boys were my grandsons, even if they called me Grammy, Maggie, in the same tone they might use for a babysitter. The morning everything changed started like any other. I woke up at 6:30, as I had every day for the past 50 years, and shuffled to the kitchen to make coffee. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the new refrigerator they'd bought last month. Apparently the old one was too noisy and kept the boys awake. I'd grown up during the Depression, so throwing away a perfectly good appliance felt wasteful. But Jessica had looked at me with that patient smile and explained that energy efficiency would save money in the long run. It was an investment in our future. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I heard footsteps upstairs. Not unusual. Mark was always an early riser. What was unusual was hearing Jessica's voice, clear and urgent, cutting through the morning stillness. "We need to move faster on this," she was saying. "She's getting more suspicious about the money transfers." I froze, my hand hovering over the sugar bowl. Money transfers? What money transfers? Mark's voice rumbled in response, but I couldn't make out the words. Their bedroom was directly above the kitchen, and sound carried strangely through the old house. I found myself holding my breath, straining to listen. "I don't care if it seems rushed," Jessica continued, her voice clearer now, as if she'd moved closer to the floor vent. "The Alzheimer's diagnosis gives us the perfect cover. Once we have full power of attorney, we can liquidate everything. The house, the stocks, even that ridiculous jewelry collection she hoards." My knees went weak. Alzheimer's diagnosis? I had never been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Sure, I'd been having some trouble remembering names lately, and yes, I'd gotten confused about which day the cleaning lady came last week, but that was normal aging, wasn't it? What about the will? Mark asked, his voice clearer now. She hasn't updated it since your dad died. That's what I'm saying, Jessica replied with what sounded almost like excitement. If we can get her declared incompetent, we can challenge any changes she tries to make. The current will leaves everything to me anyway, but this way we cover all our bases. Dr. Patterson already agreed to back up the diagnosis if anyone questions it. The coffee maker finished brewing with a loud beep that made me jump. I stood, there in my flannel nightgown, staring at the machine as steam rose from the carafe, trying to process what I'd just heard. Dr. Patterson was my physician. He'd been treating me for high blood pressure and the occasional bout of insomnia since David died. Just last month, he'd told me I was in remarkable health for a woman my age. The best part, Jessica was saying, is that she's so dependent on us now, she won't even question it. Remember how easy it was to get her to move out of the master bedroom? She practically thanked us for the suggestion. Their laughter drifted down through the ceiling, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a pond when the temperature shifts just enough to create those hairline fractures that spread slowly, silently, until the whole surface is compromised. I poured my coffee with steady hands, added 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and walked to the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 38 years. The morning light filtered through the window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. But everything had changed. They thought I had Alzheimer's. Or rather, they were going to claim I had Alzheimer's. They were planning to take control of my finances, liquidate my assets, and I'd apparently made it easy for them by being so dependent and grateful for their help. I thought about the past few months with new clarity. The way Jessica had started handling my correspondence, explaining that she didn't want me to worry about boring business stuff. The way Mark had suggested I stop driving at night because my reflexes weren't what they used to be. The way they'd both insisted on coming with me to my last doctor's appointment, claiming they wanted to make sure I didn't forget to ask about my medications. How long had they been planning this? How long had they been watching me, cataloging my small memory lapses and moments of confusion, building their case? The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me look up. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair perfect despite the early hour, wearing the silk robe I'd given her for Christmas 2 years ago. She looked surprised to see me already awake. "Oh, Mom, you're up early," she said, her voice automatically shifting into that gentle, patronizing tone I'd grown so accustomed to. "Did you remember to take your morning pills?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. When had the concern in her eyes become calculation? When had her helpful suggestions become subtle manipulations? "I'm not sure," I said carefully. "Could you remind me which ones I'm supposed to take?" Jessica's face lit up with what I now recognized as satisfaction rather than genuine care. "Of course, sweetie. That's why we made that pill organizer for you, remember? Let me get it." She bustled over to the counter where a large plastic pill organizer sat next to the coffee maker. I'd never seen it before today, but I nodded as if I remembered perfectly. Jessica opened the compartment labeled Monday Morning and shook out 3 pills into her palm. "Here we go," she said, bringing them over with a glass of water. "Your blood pressure medication, your vitamin D, and the new one Dr. Patterson prescribed to help with your memory." I stared at the pills in her palm. The blood pressure medication I recognized. Small, white, round. The vitamin D was a yellow gel cap I'd been taking for years, but the third pill was something I'd never seen before. Small, blue, oval-shaped. "What's the memory medication called?" I asked, picking up the blue pill and examining it. "Oh, I can never pronounce those medical names," Jessica said with a laugh that sounded forced. "Dr. Patterson said it would help with the forgetfulness." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You've been having more trouble with that lately, haven't you? Had I? I thought back over the past few weeks. Yes, I'd forgotten the cleaning lady's schedule. I'd called my neighbor Patricia by her sister's name twice. I'd lost my reading glasses and found them in the refrigerator, of all places. But were these signs of Alzheimer's, or just the normal absent-mindedness that came with age and grief? I placed the blue pill on my tongue and took a sip of water, but instead of swallowing, I tucked the pill under my tongue and swallowed only the water. Jessica watched me carefully, and when I opened my mouth to show it was empty, she smiled, approvingly. "Good girl," she said, patting my shoulder. "I'm going to get the boys ready for school. Mark will drive you to your hair appointment this afternoon, okay? We don't want you driving alone anymore." After she left, I went to the bathroom and spat the blue pill into my hand. Then I sat on the edge of the bathtub and really looked at it. There were tiny numbers stamped on one side. I'd seen enough medication commercials to know that legitimate prescription drugs had identifying marks, but something about this felt wrong. Later that morning, while Jessica was busy getting Tyler and Mason ready for school, I slipped into David's old study, now the playroom. The computer they'd set up for the boys was an old desktop that Mark had brought from his office, and I was grateful that my generation had lived through the technology revolution. David and I had learned to use computers together in our 60s, and while I wasn't as quick as I used to be, I still remembered the basics. I typed the numbers from the blue pill into a search engine and waited. The results made my blood run cold. The medication was real, but it wasn't for memory improvement. It was a mild sedative, commonly prescribed for anxiety and sleep disorders. The side effects included confusion, short-term memory loss, and difficulty concentrating. If someone took it regularly, especially someone my age, it could easily create the symptoms of cognitive decline. They weren't just planning to claim I had Alzheimer's. They were actively giving me medication to make me appear symptomatic. I closed the browser and sat back in David's old chair, the same chair where he'd spent countless hours working on his memoirs, planning our retirement, dreaming about the future we'd share. I thought about what he would say if he could see what was happening. David had always been protective of me, sometimes overprotective, but he'd also respected my intelligence and independence. He'd never treated me like a child, even when I'd made mistakes or needed help. The sound of car doors slamming made me look out the window. Jessica was loading the boys into her SUV for the drive to school. Mark was already gone. He left early, every morning for his job at the insurance company. I watched my daughter help Tyler with his backpack, ruffle Mason's hair, and give them both quick kisses on their foreheads. She looked like any other loving mother dropping her children off at school. But appearances, I was learning, could be devastatingly deceptive. I spent the rest of the morning thinking, really thinking, for the first time in months. I walked through the house, my house, and saw it with new eyes. The family photos that had been quietly replaced with pictures that featured Jessica and her family more prominently. The furniture that had been rearranged or replaced without my input. The mail that Jessica now sorted before I ever saw it. The checkbook that Mark had taken over to reduce my stress. How had I let this happen? How had I become so passive, so grateful for their help that I'd handed over control of my own life without even realizing it? The answer was painfully simple. I'd been lonely and grieving, and they'd offered comfort and support. When Jessica suggested I move to the guest room, it had felt like care. When Mark offered to handle the finances, it had felt like relief. When they both insisted on accompanying me to doctor's appointments, it had felt like love. But love doesn't involve secret conversations about Alzheimer's diagnoses and asset liquidation. Love doesn't involve medicating someone into confusion. Love doesn't involve treating a competent adult like a child who can't be trusted with their own decisions. That afternoon, Mark dutifully drove me to my hair appointment as promised. I'd been going to the same salon for 20 years, and my stylist, Carmen, knew me well. As she trimmed my silver hair, I caught her eye in the mirror. "Carmen," I said carefully, "have you noticed any changes in me lately? Any signs that I'm becoming forgetful or confused?" Carmen paused, her scissors halfway to my hair. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're one of the sharpest ladies I know. You remember my kids' names, ask about my mother's arthritis, and you always know exactly how you want your hair done. Why would you ask such a thing?" I smiled at her reflection. "Just wondering. Sometimes we don't see changes in ourselves that others might notice." "Honey," Carmen said firmly, "if you're losing your mind, then we all are. You're fine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." On the drive home, Mark was unusually chatty. He talked about work, about the boys' soccer season, about a vacation they were planning for the summer. It all sounded normal, pleasant even, but I found myself analyzing every word, looking for hidden meanings. "By the way," he said as we pulled into the driveway, "Jess scheduled another appointment with Dr. Patterson for next week. Just a routine follow-up, but we want to make sure your new medication is working properly." "Of course," I said. "What day?" "Thursday at 2. Don't worry about remembering. I'll put it on your calendar." My calendar. Another thing they'd taken control of without my noticing. When had I stopped managing my own appointments? When had I become someone who needed reminders written down for her like a child? That evening, I sat in my small room and made a decision. Whatever game Jessica and Mark were playing, I was going to learn the rules. And then, I was going to change them. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to know how far they'd already gone, what they'd already done, and what they were planning to do next. I needed to gather evidence, document everything, and most importantly, I needed to do it all while appearing to be the confused, dependent old woman they believed me to be. I thought about the blue pills Jessica had been giving me, probably, for weeks or even months. I thought about the conversations they'd had about declaring me incompetent, about challenging any changes to my will. I thought about Dr. Patterson, who was apparently willing to provide false diagnoses to support their plan. They had underestimated me. They saw an elderly widow who was grateful for their help, confused by modern life, dependent on their guidance. They didn't see the woman who had helped David build his business from nothing, who had managed our household finances for 40 years, who had survived the depression as a child and learned never to trust appearances over substance. Margaret, Elena Whitmore, was about to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. I opened the drawer of my bedside table and pulled out the small leather journal David had given me for our last Christmas together. I'd been too sad to write in it after he died, but tonight felt like the right time to start. On the first page, in my careful handwriting, I wrote the date and a single sentence. "Today I learned that the people I trusted most have been planning to steal my life. Tomorrow I begin planning to take it back." As I closed the journal and turned off the bedside lamp, I could hear Jessica and Mark talking quietly in the living room. Their voices were too low for me to make out words, but the tone was familiar, secretive, urgent, planning. Let them plan, I thought. They had no idea what they'd awakened. For the first time in months, I fell asleep quickly and slept deeply, undisturbed by the medication they thought I was taking. And for the first time since David's death, I woke up with a sense of purpose. The war for my independence had begun, and I intended to win it. The next morning brought rain, the kind of steady drizzle that made everything look gray and muted. I woke up feeling more alert than I had in weeks, my mind sharp and focused in a way that surprised me. It was remarkable how much clearer everything seemed when you weren't being slowly poisoned by sedatives disguised as memory medication. I dressed carefully in my navy blue cardigan and pearls, the same outfit I'd worn to every important meeting for the past 20 years. If I was going to start investigating my own family, I might as well look the part of a respectable woman conducting respectable business. Jessica was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, standing at the counter with her back to me. She was on the phone, her voice low and urgent. I moved quietly to the coffee maker, grateful for the thick Persian rug David had insisted on buying for this room. It muffled footsteps beautifully. "No, I told you. We can't move any faster without raising suspicions," Jessica was saying. "She's already asking questions about the medication. Yesterday she wanted to know what it was called." My hand trembled slightly as I reached for a coffee mug, but I forced myself to remain calm. More evidence for my journal. "Look, Dr. Patterson said the cognitive decline symptoms should be more pronounced within another week or two. Then we can schedule the competency evaluation with that psychiatrist. You found, what was his name again?" She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. I assumed it was Mark, calling from his office. "Right, Dr. Hensley. And you're sure he'll provide the diagnosis we need?" Another pause. "Good. Because once we have that official documentation, we can move forward with everything else. The bank, the lawyers, all of it." I poured my coffee slowly, keeping my movements natural and unhurried. Jessica still hadn't noticed I was in the room. I know. It feels wrong, but think about what we're building for Tyler and Mason. This house alone is worth almost $2 million now, and that's not counting the investment portfolio or the life insurance. We're talking about setting our boys up for life. The investment portfolio. I'd built that portfolio carefully over 40 years, starting with the small inheritance from my parents and growing it through careful research and conservative investments. David and I had planned to leave it to Jessica, of course, but we'd also discussed establishing college funds for the boys and donations to the charities we supported. Apparently, Jessica had different ideas about how that money should be distributed. Besides, Jessica continued, it's not like we're really hurting her. She'll be taken care of. The assisted living facility we looked at is very nice. She'll have everything she needs, and will visit regularly. Assisted living facility. They weren't just planning to take my money and my house. They were planning to put me away. I cleared my throat softly, and Jessica spun around, her face flushing. Red. "I have to go," she said quickly into the phone. "I'll call you later." "Good morning, sweetheart," I said pleasantly, stirring sugar into my coffee. "You're up early." "Oh, you know how it is," Jessica said, fumbling to put her phone away. "Tyler forgot his science project at home, so Mark had to turn around and come back. I was just coordinating with him." The lie came so easily that I wondered how many others I'd missed over the months. How many phone calls had I interrupted without realizing what I was hearing? How many conversations had stopped abruptly when I entered a room? "Speaking of Mark," I said, settling into my usual chair at the kitchen table, "I've been thinking about our financial arrangements." Jessica's entire body went rigid. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's just that I realized I haven't seen a bank statement or investment summary in months. I used to review everything quarterly, but somehow I've gotten out of that habit. I thought maybe this afternoon we could sit down and go over everything together. You know, make sure I understand where we stand." The color drained from Jessica's face. "Mom, we've talked about this. All that financial stuff is too stressful for you now. That's why Mark and I took it over. We're handling everything perfectly well." "I'm sure you are, dear," I said mildly. "But I'd still like to see the statements. It's my money, after all." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Jessica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. Anger. Resentment. As if my perfectly reasonable request to see my own financial information was somehow unreasonable. "Of course it's your money," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. I just think it's unnecessary for you to worry about all those details. Why don't you focus on enjoying your retirement instead of stressing about numbers and accounts? Because those numbers and accounts represent 40 years of David's and my hard work, I said quietly. Because understanding my financial situation helps me feel secure and in control. Because I'm 70 years old, not 7, and I'm perfectly capable of reviewing my own bank statements. Jessica's face flushed again, but this time with anger rather than embarrassment. Mom, I think you're getting agitated over nothing. Maybe you should take your morning medication and rest for a while. There it was. The moment I pushed back, even slightly, she immediately suggested medication and rest. The same pattern I'd probably been experiencing for months without recognizing it. I've already taken my medication, I lied smoothly. And I feel perfectly calm. I simply want to review my financial statements. Surely that's not too much to ask? We stared at each other across the kitchen table, and I realized this was the first real confrontation we'd had in years. For so long, I'd been agreeable, grateful, easy to manage. The old Margaret would have backed down at the first sign of Jessica's displeasure, apologized for causing trouble, and retreated to her room to avoid conflict. But the old Margaret hadn't known she was being systematically drugged and manipulated. Fine, Jessica said finally. I'll ask Mark to pull everything together for you, but I really think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Thank you, I said pleasantly. I appreciate that. The rest of the morning passed. Intense politeness. Jessica went about her usual routine of managing the household, but I could feel her watching me differently. I'd broken the script, stepped out of my assigned role as the grateful, dependent mother, and she didn't like it. After she left to run errands, I retreated to David's old study and continued my research. I'd hidden the blue pill from yesterday in my jewelry box, and now I looked up more detailed information about it. What I found was even more disturbing than I'd initially thought. The medication wasn't just a mild sedative. When taken regularly by elderly patients, it could cause something called medication-induced cognitive impairment. The symptoms were virtually indistinguishable from early-stage dementia. Confusion, short-term memory loss, difficulty with complex tasks, changes in personality and judgment. If someone didn't know the person was taking this medication, they might easily conclude that cognitive decline was the cause. Worse, the medication was cumulative. The longer someone took it, the more pronounced the effects became. If I'd been taking this for months, as I suspected, it explained so much about my recent struggles. The forgetfulness, the confusion, the way complex tasks had started to feel overwhelming. It wasn't age or grief or the early stages of Alzheimer's. It was pharmaceutical manipulation. I printed out several pages of information about the medication and its side effects, then hid them in the back of one of David's old business files. Then I turned my attention to my finances. Mark had taken over my financial management gradually, so smoothly that I'd barely noticed the transition. First, he'd offered to help me set up online banking after David died, explaining that it would be easier than driving to the bank for every transaction. Then he'd suggested consolidating my accounts to simplify things. Then he'd recommended a financial advisor, a friend of his who specialized in retirement planning for widows. Each step had seemed reasonable, even helpful. But now I wondered what I'd actually agreed to. What documents had I signed? What authority had I given him? What changes had been made to my accounts without my knowledge? I spent the next hour trying to access my online banking, but the passwords had been changed. When I called the bank directly, I was told that account access questions would need to go through my financial advisor, Mr. Richardson. The same advisor Mark had recommended. The same advisor who was apparently Mark's friend. Interesting. My money. But I couldn't access information about it without going through Mark's friend. I made another call, this time to my lawyer, Thomas Bradley. Tom had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years. ever since David and I had updated our wills when we turned 60. If anyone knew what documents I'd signed recently, it would be Tom. "Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you," Tom said when his secretary put me through. "How are you holding up?" "I'm well, Tom, thank you. I'm calling because I need some information about my legal documents. Specifically, I want to review any powers of attorney or other authorization documents I might have signed in the past year." There was a long pause. "Margaret, I think there might be some confusion. You haven't been to my office in over a year. The last time we spoke was right after David's funeral, when you wanted to review your will." My blood ran cold. "Tom, I need you to be very specific with me. Have I signed any documents giving Jessica or Mark legal authority over my finances or medical decisions?" "Absolutely not. Margaret, what's going on? Has someone told you that you've signed documents you don't remember?" I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that I apparently hadn't signed away my legal rights without knowing it. Terror at what this meant about Jessica and Mark's plans. "Tom, I need to see you as soon as possible. Today, if you can manage it. And I need you to do something for me first. I want you to contact Dr. Patterson's office and request copies of all my medical records from the past year. I also want you to run a credit check and get copies of any financial documents that might have been filed with my signature. Margaret, you're scaring me. What's happened?" "Someone is trying to have me declared incompetent so they can take control of my assets. I need to know exactly what they've done so far, and I need to stop them before they can do any more damage." Tom's voice became crisp and professional. "I can see you at 3 o'clock today, and Margaret, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't let anyone know you've contacted me until we've talked." After I hung up, I sat in David's chair and tried to process what I'd learned. Jessica and Mark had been planning this for months, possibly longer. They'd been gradually taking control of my life, my finances, my medical care, my living situation. They'd been drugging me to create symptoms of cognitive decline. They'd found doctors willing to provide false diagnoses. They'd researched assisted living facilities and psychiatrists who would declare me incompetent. But they hadn't actually filed any legal documents yet. They hadn't managed to get me declared incompetent. They didn't have legal power of attorney, which meant I still had time to stop them. The question was how. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything I could remember from the past few months. Every conversation, every change to my routine, every time I'd felt confused or disoriented. I wrote it all down in my leather journal, noting dates and times as precisely as I could recall. When Jessica returned from her errands, she seemed nervous. She kept looking at me sideways, as if trying to gauge whether I was still the compliant, medicated woman she'd been managing for months. "Mom, I spoke to Mark about those financial statements you wanted to see," she said as she unpacked groceries. "He's going to bring everything home tonight so we can go over it together after dinner." "That's perfect," I said. "I'm looking forward to it." But as I watched her put away groceries, I noticed something interesting. She was stocking up on convenience foods, processed meals, things that could be prepared quickly, as if she wasn't planning to be doing much cooking in the near future. As if she wasn't planning to be here much longer. That afternoon, I kept my appointment with Tom Bradley. I told him everything, showed him the medication I'd been given, shared the conversations I'd overheard. Tom listened with the careful attention of a lawyer building a case, asking clarifying questions and taking detailed notes. "Margaret, what you're describing is elder abuse," he said when I finished. "Financial exploitation, medication tampering, false imprisonment in some ways. This is serious criminal behavior. What can we do about it?" "Several things. First, I'm going to file a protective order to prevent any changes to your financial accounts without court approval. Second, I'm going to request an independent medical evaluation to document your actual cognitive state. Third, I'm going to contact the police. The police? The thought hadn't occurred to me. Margaret, they've been poisoning you. That's attempted murder, or at minimum, assault with a dangerous substance. They've been planning to defraud you of millions of dollars. They've been conspiring to have you falsely committed. These are felonies. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Tom was saying. In my mind, this had been a family problem, a betrayal that hurt my feelings and threatened my independence. I hadn't fully grasped that it was also a crime. What do I do tonight when Mark shows me the financial statements? Should I confront them? Absolutely not. Continue to act as if nothing has changed. Let them think their plan is working. The more evidence we can gather of their intentions, the stronger our case will be. Tom walked me through the next steps. He would contact Detective Morrison, who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly. He would arrange for the independent medical evaluation. He would file the protective orders first thing in the morning. In the meantime, I was to document everything and avoid taking any medication Jessica gave me. One more thing, Tom said as I prepared to leave. Have you considered what you want to happen to Jessica and Mark when this is over? Because once we start this process, there's no going back. They'll likely face serious criminal charges. I thought about Tyler and Mason, my grandsons who would grow up knowing their parents had tried to steal from their grandmother. I thought about family dinners and Christmas mornings, and all the normal relationships that would be destroyed by this revelation. But then I thought about the assisted living facility Jessica had researched. I thought about the blue pills designed to make me confused and dependent. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard about liquidating my assets and kicking me out of my own home. Tom, I said quietly, they stopped being my family the moment they decided to treat me like a Mark instead of a mother. Whatever consequences they face, they've earned. That evening, Mark came home with a briefcase full of documents. Jessica had prepared a nice dinner, and the boys were unusually well behaved. It felt almost like old times, like the loving family I'd thought we were. After dinner, Mark spread papers across the dining room table with the air of someone doing a favor for a confused old woman. "Okay, Mom," he said patronizingly. "Let's go through this together. Now, don't worry if some of it seems complicated. Just ask questions if you don't understand something." I put on my reading glasses and examined the documents he'd provided. Bank statements, investment summaries, insurance policies. At first glance, everything looked normal. But as I studied the details more carefully, I began to see the problems. Several large transfers had been made from my savings account to something called Whitmore Family Trust. When I asked about it, Mark explained that it was a tax shelter he'd set up to protect my assets. "It's all still your money," he assured me. "This just makes it more tax efficient." But I noticed that the trust documents listed Mark as the primary trustee, with Jessica as the secondary. My name appeared only as the beneficiary, which meant that while it might technically still be my money, I no longer had control over it. 3 of my investment accounts had been closed and the funds transferred to a new advisory firm. Mark's friend Richardson, the financial advisor I'd supposedly chosen. Richardson specializes in conservative investments for retirees, Mark explained. "Your old advisor was taking too many risks with your portfolio." But my old advisor, Janet Chen, had been managing my investments successfully for over a decade. She'd been conservative, professional, and had always kept me fully informed about every decision. I'd never expressed any dissatisfaction with her services. The life insurance policy had been updated to increase the death benefit significantly. The monthly premiums had tripled, but Mark assured me it was worth it for the additional security it would provide for my beneficiaries. "Besides," he said with a smile that no longer looked warm, "at your age, you want to make sure everything is in order." Every change he showed me had been presented as being in my best interest. Tax efficiency, conservative investments, additional security, better management. But the effect of all these changes was the same. I'd been systematically removed from control of my own financial life. "This all looks very complicated," I said, playing the part of the confused elderly woman they expected me to be. "I'm grateful you're handling it all for me." Mark and Jessica exchanged a look of satisfaction. They thought they'd successfully managed my concerns, kept me docile and grateful while they continued to tighten their control. "Don't worry, Mom," Jessica said, patting my hand. "We're taking care of everything. You don't need to stress about any of this." Later that night, I lay in my narrow bed in the guest room and listened to them talking in the living room. Their voices were more relaxed now, confident. "She bought it completely," Mark was saying. "I think we're in the clear." "Good, because Dr. Hensley can see her next Thursday. Patterson already sent over her medical records with his notes about her cognitive decline. Hensley said that should be more than enough for the competency evaluation. And the Shady Oaks facility has an opening at the end of the month. We can probably have her moved in within 2 weeks of getting the incompetency ruling." Shady Oaks. Even the name sounded ominous. "What about her lawyer?" Jessica asked. "She mentioned wanting to review legal documents. Do you think she'll try to contact him?" "Bradley? He's ancient, probably retired by now. Besides, even if she did call him, what could he tell her? We haven't filed any legal papers yet. Everything we've done has been with her consent." They had no idea I'd already been to see Tom. They had no idea that protective orders would be filed in the morning. They had no idea that I was documenting their every move. "The beautiful thing," Mark continued, "is that by the time we're done, she'll be so medicated and confused that even if she tries to complain, no one will believe her. Everyone will just see a sad old woman with dementia making up stories about her caring family." Jessica laughed, a sound that once would have warmed my heart but now made my skin crawl. "I almost feel bad about how easy this has been. She's made it so simple by being so trusting." "Well, that's what happens when you treat people like children for too long," Mark said. "Eventually they start acting like children." I closed my eyes and gripped my leather journal tighter. They thought they'd been treating me like a child, reducing me to someone who needed constant guidance and protection. Tomorrow, they were going to learn the difference between treating someone like a child and underestimating a woman who'd survived 7 decades by being stronger and smarter than anyone gave her credit for. The next morning, I woke up early and called Tom's office. "It's time," I told him. "File everything." By noon, the protective orders were in place. By evening, Detective Morrison had been briefed on the case. By the end of the week, Jessica and Mark's carefully constructed plan would be nothing but evidence in a criminal investigation. But they didn't know that yet. For now, they were still treating me like a child who couldn't possibly outmaneuver them. They were about to discover just how wrong they'd been. The following Tuesday arrived with unseasonably warm weather that made everything in the garden bloom early. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the daffodils push through the soil in defiant bursts of yellow, and thought about timing. In 3 days, Jessica and Mark believed they would be taking me to see Dr. Hensley for what they assumed would be a rubber stamp competency evaluation. They had no idea that Dr. Hensley would instead be meeting with Detective Morrison to discuss his role in their conspiracy. I'd spent the weekend perfecting my performance as the increasingly confused and dependent woman they expected me to be. During meals, I'd ask Jessica to remind me what day it was. I'd look puzzled when Mark mentioned routine appointments. I'd even put my reading glasses in the refrigerator again, making sure Jessica saw me searching for them later with apparent bewilderment. "Oh, Mom," she'd said with exaggerated patience, "you're getting worse, aren't you? Maybe we should move up your appointment with Dr. Hensley." "Whatever you think is best, dear," I'd replied in the vague, agreeable tone I'd been cultivating. "You know I trust your judgment completely." The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, they'd been systematically making me appear incompetent, while I unknowingly cooperated by actually becoming confused due to their medication. Now, I was deliberately appearing incompetent while being more mentally sharp than I'd felt in years. Detective Morrison had visited on Monday while Jessica was out shopping and Mark was at work. He was a compact man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and the manner of someone who'd seen every variation of human greed imaginable. "Mrs. Whitmore," he'd said after reviewing my documentation, "I've been investigating elder abuse cases for 12 years, and I have to tell you, this is one of the most sophisticated schemes I've encountered. They've been very careful to establish a paper trail that makes everything look legitimate." "But it's not legitimate," I'd said. "None of it was done with my informed consent." "Exactly, and that's what we're going to prove. But I need you to continue acting as if nothing has changed until we can catch them in the act of actually filing fraudulent competency documents. Right now, we have evidence of medication tampering and financial manipulation, but we need them to take the final step." Detective Morrison had explained the plan. I would go to the appointment with Dr. Hensley as scheduled. But instead of the corrupt psychiatrist Jessica and Mark had arranged, I'd be meeting with Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations for the court system. Dr. Chen would conduct a legitimate evaluation that would definitively prove my mental competence. Meanwhile, Detective Morrison and his team would be gathering evidence about the financial transfers and documenting the conspiracy. "The beautiful thing about criminals," Detective Morrison had said with a slight smile, "is that they almost always get overconfident right before they get caught. They think they're so clever that they stop being careful." Now, standing at my window on Tuesday morning, I wondered if Jessica and Mark were feeling that overconfidence. They certainly seemed relaxed. Mark had been whistling while he shaved yesterday morning, and Jessica had been browsing vacation rental websites on her laptop, apparently planning the trip they intended to take once they'd successfully disposed of me and liquidated my assets. The sound of voices in the kitchen drew my attention. Jessica was on the phone again, but this time she wasn't bothering to keep her voice low. "No, everything's perfect," she was saying. "The appointment is Thursday at 2, and Dr. Hensley assured us it's just a formality. Once we have the incompetency ruling, we can move forward with everything else." I slipped out of my room and moved closer to the kitchen, staying just out of sight. The assisted living place is expecting her on Monday. I've already told them about her condition, so they'll be prepared for any resistance or confusion when we bring her in. Resistance or confusion. As if my perfectly reasonable objection to being institutionalized against my will would be evidence of mental illness rather than a normal human response to betrayal. Mark's handling the final property transfers this week. Once she's out of the house, we can put it on the market immediately. The realtor thinks we can get at least $2.2 million, maybe more if we stage it properly. $2.2 million for the house David and I had bought for $68,000 in 1985. The house where I'd raised Jessica, where we'd hosted Christmas dinners and birthday parties, where David had died peacefully in his sleep just 18 months ago. To Jessica, it was nothing more than a real estate transaction. I know it seems fast, but think about it this way. The longer we wait, the more chance there is for complications. What if she gets suspicious? What if someone starts asking questions? It's better to get everything settled quickly and cleanly. What if she gets suspicious? I almost laughed out loud. I'd been suspicious for over a week now, and they were so confident in their control over me that they hadn't noticed anything. The boys are excited about the new house. Tyler keeps asking when we're going to move into the big house with the swimming pool. I told him we had to wait for Grammy Maggie to go live with other people her age first. Other people her age. As if being 70 automatically meant I belonged in an institution rather than in my own home. As if my age somehow disqualified me from making decisions about my own life. I crept back to my room and added this conversation to my journal. Detective Morrison had stressed the importance of documenting everything, and I'd become meticulous. about recording times, dates, and exact quotes whenever possible. The next day, Wednesday, brought an unexpected development. Dr. Patterson's office called to schedule a follow-up appointment. Dr. Patterson would like to see you next week to discuss adjusting your medication, the receptionist said. He wants to increase the dosage of your memory medication since you're still experiencing some confusion. I accepted the appointment graciously, knowing I'd never keep it. By next week, Dr. Patterson would likely be explaining his fraudulent diagnoses to Detective Morrison rather than adjusting medication dosages for fake patients. That afternoon, while Jessica was picking up the boys from school, I received a call from Tom Bradley. "Margaret, I have some interesting news," he said. "I've been digging into this Richardson character who's been managing your investments. He's not actually a licensed financial advisor." "What do you mean?" "I mean he has no credentials, no license, no authorization to manage anyone's investments. He's essentially been running an illegal investment scheme using your money. The good news is that most of your funds are still intact, probably because they haven't had time to steal them yet. The bad news is that they've been charging substantial management fees for services they're not qualified to provide." This revelation hit me harder than I'd expected. It was one thing to discover that Jessica and Mark were planning to have me declared incompetent. It was another to learn that they'd already been actively stealing from me through fraudulent investment management. "How much?" I asked. "Approximately $68,000 in fees over the past 8 months, plus another $40,000 in unnecessary transaction costs from moving your investments around. Over $100,000. Gone. Stolen through an elaborate scheme designed to look legitimate while they systematically looted my life savings. Tom, I want them prosecuted for every penny." "Don't worry, Margaret. By the time Detective Morrison is finished with this case, they'll be lucky if they're not spending the next decade in prison." That evening, Mark made a production of showing me some papers he claimed I needed to sign for insurance purposes. "Just routine stuff. Mom," he said, spreading the documents across the dining room table. "The insurance company needs updated beneficiary information." I put on my reading glasses and examined the papers carefully. They weren't insurance documents. They were financial power of attorney forms, giving Mark complete control over all my assets. The documents were backdated to make it appear as if I'd signed them months ago, during the period when I'd supposedly been showing signs of cognitive decline. "I'm not sure I understand all this legal language," I said, playing my part perfectly. "It looks very complicated." "That's exactly why you need to let us handle these things for you," Jessica chimed in. "All those legal terms are confusing, even for people our age. You don't need to worry about understanding it all. Just sign where Mark shows you." They were asking me to sign documents that would complete their theft of my life savings, and they were framing it as doing me a favor by protecting me from confusing legal language. "I suppose you're right," I said, picking up the pen. Then I paused, as if a thought had just occurred to me. "But shouldn't my lawyer review these first? David always said never to sign legal documents without having Tom Bradley look at them." Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, we've already had our lawyer review everything. These are just standard forms. There's really no need to involve Bradley." "But David always said—" "David's gone, Mom," Jessica interrupted, her voice sharper than she'd probably intended. "You need to start trusting the people who are actually here to take care of you." The mask was slipping. For just a moment, I could see the frustration and impatience underneath Jessica's carefully maintained facade of loving concern. I set down the pen and looked confused. "I'm sorry, dear. I know you're trying to help. It's just that everything seems so complicated lately. Maybe I should wait until I'm feeling more clear-headed." Mark and Jessica exchanged a look of barely controlled annoyance. They'd been so close to getting my signature on the documents that would give them complete legal control over my finances, and I'd backed away at the last moment. "Of course, Mom," Mark said through gritted teeth. "Why don't we wait until after your appointment with Dr. Hensley? You might feel more comfortable making decisions once you've talked to him. Perfect. They were banking everything on Thursday's appointment, confident that Dr. Hensley would provide the competency ruling they needed to override any objections I might have. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold. I dressed with extra care, choosing a burgundy suit that David had always said made me look distinguished. If I was going to be evaluated for mental competence, I wanted to look like a woman who was fully in control of her faculties. Jessica seemed nervous as she made breakfast, dropping a plate and spilling coffee on her blouse. Mark, by contrast, appeared almost giddy with anticipation. "Big day today, Mom," he said cheerfully. "Dr. Hensley is supposed to be one of the best psychiatrists in the state. I'm sure he'll be able to help you understand what's been happening with your memory." "I hope so," I said meekly. "I've been so worried about it." The drive to Dr. Hensley's office took 20 minutes. Jessica and Mark kept up a steady stream of conversation about my symptoms, as if I weren't sitting right there in the back seat. "The confusion has definitely gotten worse in the past few weeks," Jessica was saying. "Yesterday she couldn't remember what day it was, and she keeps putting things in strange places." "The medication doesn't seem to be helping," Mark added. "If anything, she seems more disoriented since she started taking it." Of course the medication wasn't helping. It was designed to cause the symptoms they were describing, not treat them. When we arrived at the medical building, I noticed several things that Jessica and Mark apparently missed. There was a police car parked across the street. A man in a gray suit was sitting in the lobby reading a newspaper, but his eyes followed us as we walked to the elevators. Another man was standing near the building directory, apparently studying the list of tenants but clearly watching our group. Detective Morrison had said his team would be discreet, but I was starting to wonder if Jessica and Mark were too excited about their upcoming victory to notice the surveillance. Dr. Hensley's office was on the 3rd floor. When we got off the elevator, Jessica took my arm as if I needed assistance walking, and Mark positioned himself on my other side. To anyone watching, it probably looked like a loving family helping an elderly woman to a medical appointment. In reality, they were making sure I couldn't escape or change my mind. The receptionist greeted us warmly and asked us to have a seat in the waiting room. Within a few minutes, a woman in her 40s emerged from an inner office. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Chen. Would you come back with me, please?" Jessica immediately stood up. "We'd like to come with her, if that's all right. She sometimes gets confused and forgets important information." Dr. Chen smiled politely. "I appreciate your concern, but I prefer to conduct initial evaluations privately. You can join us later if needed." Mark's face flushed. "But we're her caregivers. We have a right to be present during any medical evaluation." "Actually, you don't," Dr. Chen said calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore is an adult who hasn't been declared incompetent, which means she has the right to privacy during medical consultations. Unless she specifically requests your presence, I'm required to see her alone." I could see the panic starting to set in. This wasn't going according to their script. Dr. Hensley was supposed to be their ally, someone who would rubber stamp their competency evaluation while they watched to make sure I didn't say anything that contradicted their narrative. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Chen said, turning to me, "would you like your family members to join us?" "Oh, I think I'll be fine on my own," I said, suddenly sounding much more confident than I had all morning. "Thank you for asking." Jessica's mouth fell open. For months, I'd been agreeable to everything, never asserting my own preferences, always deferring to their judgment. Now, when it mattered most, I was suddenly making independent decisions. Dr. Chen led me down a hallway to her office, leaving Jessica and Mark staring after us in confusion and growing alarm. Once we were alone, Dr. Chen's demeanor changed completely. She gestured for me to take a seat in a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm a forensic psychiatrist working with Detective Morrison. I understand you've been through quite an ordeal. That's putting it mildly, I said, my voice steady and clear. But I'm ready to put an end to it. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen conducted the most thorough mental status evaluation I'd ever experienced. She tested my memory, my reasoning ability, my understanding of financial concepts, my awareness of current events. She asked detailed questions about my medical history, my family relationships, and my living situation. She had me solve math problems, recall word lists, and explain complex scenarios. Mrs. Whitmore, she said when we were finished, I want to be very clear about my findings. You show absolutely no signs of cognitive impairment, dementia, or any other condition that would affect your ability to make informed decisions about your life and finances. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and your understanding of complex concepts is well above average for someone of any age. What about the confusion and memory problems I've been experiencing? Based on the medication analysis Detective Morrison provided, those symptoms were almost certainly caused by the sedatives you were unknowingly taking. Now that you've stopped taking them, your cognitive function appears to have returned to normal. Dr. Chen spent another 30 minutes documenting her findings and preparing her report. Then she picked up her phone and made a brief call. Detective Morrison? Yes, she's here with me now. Completely competent. No question about it. You can proceed with the arrests. My heart started racing. Arrests? Today? Mrs. Whitmore, Jessica and Mark are about to be charged with elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and several other felonies. They're waiting in my reception area right now, expecting to receive a report that declares you incompetent. Instead, they're going to be placed under arrest. I thought about Tyler and Mason, probably at school right now, unaware that their parents were about to be led away in handcuffs. I thought about the family dinners we'd never have again, the holidays that would be forever changed, the relationships that would be destroyed by this revelation. But then I thought about the assisted living facility where they'd planned to warehouse me. I thought about the blue pills designed to make me confused and dependent. I thought about the $2.2 million they'd planned to steal from the sale of my home. I thought about Mark whistling happily while he planned my destruction, and Jessica researching vacation rentals with money she intended to steal from me. Dr. Chen, I said quietly, they stopped being my family the moment they decided I was worth more to them dead or institutionalized than alive and independent. Let's go face them. When we emerged from Dr. Chen's office, the waiting room had become considerably more crowded. Detective Morrison was there, along with 2 uniformed police officers and another detective I didn't recognize. Jessica and Mark were still sitting where we'd left them, but their expressions had changed from confusion to outright fear. Jessica Whitmore and Mark Patterson, Detective Morrison said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and fraud. The next few minutes were a blur of Miranda rights, handcuffs, and Jessica's increasingly hysterical protests. This is insane, she was screaming as the officers led her toward the elevator. She's sick. She has Alzheimer's. Dr. Patterson diagnosed her. Check her medical records. We did check her medical records, Detective Morrison replied calmly. Dr. Patterson has been very helpful in explaining how he falsified his diagnosis reports in exchange for payments from your husband. Mark, to his credit, didn't try to deny anything. He just looked at me with an expression of disbelief. How? He asked. How did you figure it out? You treated me like a child, I said simply. You assumed I was too old, too confused, too grateful for your help to notice what you were doing. You underestimated me. But the medication? You mean the sedatives you've been giving me for months? Yes, they made me confused for a while. But the beautiful thing about medication-induced cognitive impairment is that it's reversible. Stop taking the medication, and the symptoms disappear. Mark's face went white as he realized the implications. How long have you known? Long? Enough to document everything. Long enough to gather evidence. Long enough to make sure you'll never be able to hurt me or anyone else again. As they were led away, Jessica made one last desperate attempt to manipulate me. Mom, please, she called over her shoulder. Think about Tyler and Mason. Think about what this will do to them. They need their parents. I followed them to the elevator, my voice carrying clearly down the hallway. Jessica, you should have thought about Tyler and Mason before you decided to drug me and steal my life savings. You should have thought about them before you planned to have me falsely committed to an institution. You should have thought about them before you chose greed over family. The elevator doors closed on Jessica's tear-stained face, and I was left standing in the hallway with Dr. Chen and Detective Morrison. What happens now? I asked. Now we finish gathering evidence, Detective Morrison said. Richardson, the fake financial advisor, is being arrested at his office as we speak. Dr. Patterson is already in custody. We'll need you to provide additional documentation and testimony, but the hard part is over. And my assets? Your lawyer is working on that. Most of your money should be recoverable, though it might take some time to unravel all the fraudulent transactions. Dr. Chen put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Whitmore, what you've been through is traumatic, regardless of how strong you are. I'd like to recommend some counseling to help you process everything that's happened. I considered this. The past week had been the most emotionally intense of my life. Learning that the people I trusted most had been systematically betraying me, planning to steal from me, drugging me into compliance, it was a lot to absorb. I think that's a good idea, I said. But first, I want to go home. Detective Morrison drove me back to Maplewood. The house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. I was no longer a guest in my own home, no longer dependent on other people's permission to access my own money, no longer taking medication that clouded my judgment. I was Margaret Elena Whitmore again, fully competent and completely in control of my own life. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. The second thing I did was contact a cleaning service to remove every trace of Jessica and Mark's presence from my home. The third thing I did was call Tyler and Mason's school to arrange for them to be picked up by my neighbor Patricia until other arrangements could be made. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Jessica and Mark's scheme became clear. They'd been planning it for over a year, ever since David's death had left me vulnerable and alone. They'd researched medication-induced cognitive impairment, found corrupt medical professionals willing to provide false diagnoses, and carefully constructed a scenario that would allow them to steal my assets while appearing to be caring family members. The fake financial advisor Richardson had been stealing not just from me, but from several other elderly clients. Dr. Patterson had been providing fraudulent medical reports for multiple elder abuse cases. Dr. Hensley, the psychiatrist who was supposed to declare me incompetent, had been part of a network of corrupt professionals who specialized in helping families steal from vulnerable relatives. Jessica and Mark weren't just criminals. They were part of an organized conspiracy that targeted elderly people throughout the state. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Tom Bradley assured me that the evidence was overwhelming, and that Jessica and Mark would likely spend several years in prison. The thought didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt mostly sadness for the family we might have been if they'd chosen love over greed. Tyler and Mason went to live with Mark's sister in Portland. I sent them cards and letters, hoping that someday they might understand that I'd had no choice but to protect myself from their parents' betrayal. I set up college funds for both boys, despite everything, because they were innocent victims in this situation. 3 months after the arrests, I was sitting in my rose garden on a warm spring morning when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Whitmore? This is Robert Chen. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen's husband. She told me about your case, and I hope you don't mind me calling. Not at all. How can I help you? Well, this might sound strange, but I'm a retired professor of literature, and I've been working on a book about elder abuse cases. Sarah thought you might be willing to share your story. Not for any legal purpose, but to help other people recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. I thought about this. My story was certainly dramatic, but was it helpful? Could other people learn from my experience? Mr. Chen, I'd be happy to talk with you, but I have one condition. What's that? I want to co-author the book. I want to tell my own story in my own words. Robert laughed, a warm sound that reminded me of David. Mrs. Whitmore, I think that's exactly what this book needs. A strong voice from someone who refused to be a victim. 6 months later, our book, Reclaiming My Life One Woman's Fight Against Elder Abuse, was published by a small academic press. It didn't become a bestseller, but it was used in training programs for social workers, law enforcement officers, and medical professionals. I received dozens of letters from people who'd recognized similar patterns in their own families and had been able to protect themselves or their loved ones. The most meaningful letter came from a woman in Ohio whose adult children had been slowly taking control of her finances under the guise of helping her manage her affairs. She'd read our book, recognized the warning signs, and had been able to stop the financial exploitation before it progressed to the level I'd experienced. Your story saved my independence and probably my life, she wrote. Thank you for having the courage to fight back. On the first anniversary of Jessica and Mark's arrest, I threw a party. Not a celebration of their downfall, but a celebration of my survival and recovery. I invited my neighbors, my Dr. Janet Chen, who had managed my investments honestly. For so many years, Tom Bradley and his wife, Detective Morrison and Dr. Sarah Chen, Robert Chen, and several other friends I'd made while working on the book. We gathered in the rose garden that had always been my sanctuary, eating cake and drinking champagne, while the late afternoon sun cast golden light across the flowers David and I had planted together decades ago. Margaret, Tom Bradley said, as he raised his glass for a toast, you've shown all of us what it means to fight for your dignity and independence. Here's to a woman who refused to be treated like a child and instead reminded everyone that age brings wisdom, not weakness. As I looked around at the faces of people who genuinely cared about me, who respected my intelligence and valued my contributions, I realized something important. I'd been so focused on the family I'd lost that I'd almost missed the family I'd gained. Not a family bound by blood or obligation, but a family chosen for mutual respect and genuine affection. That evening, after the guests had gone home and I was alone in my house again, I sat in David's old chair in the study and opened my leather journal to the last entry. Today marks 1 year since I learned that the people I trusted most had betrayed me, I wrote. It also marks 1 year since I decided to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. I lost a daughter and son-in-law, but I found my independence, my dignity, and my voice. Most importantly, I learned that being treated like a child doesn't mean you have to act like one. Sometimes the most adult thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. I closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer. Tomorrow I would start a new journal, one that would document the next chapter of my life. A chapter where I was the author of my own story, where I made my own decisions, where I was surrounded by people who saw me as Margaret Elena Whitmore, not as an elderly woman to be managed, but as a human being to be respected. At 71 years old, I was finally free to live my life on my own terms, and I intended to make the most of every day of freedom I had left. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.